Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parsha Rabbi. Three fabulous ideas that I'm looking forward to share with you. The opening one is from the beginning of the Parsha. If you're listening online, please go to the website torahtoday.org for the handout, or email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. There is an amazing chizkuni on the first pasuk in this week's Sedra. The pasuk says, "Re'ei anochi nosen lefnechem hayom bracha uklala." See that I'm putting in front of you, says Moshe Rabbeinu, a bracha, a blessing, uklala, and a curse. As habracha asher tishmu al mitzvos Hashem Elokeichem. If you listen, the bracha will be that if you listen to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, asher anochi metzava eschem hayom, that I'm commanding you to do hayom today. Says the chizkuni, ad kan heichicham al yiras shamayim. Till now, i.e., in the first three sedras of the Sefer Devarim, Voes Chanon, and Ekev, heichicham al yiras shamayim. He's just exhorting the people in his long final speech about yiras shamayim, to remain loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mikan ve'elech maschil asad lefneihem es ha-mitzvahs. And that's what it means, that re'ei anochi nosen lefneihem hayoim bracha kloles ha-bracha el ha-mitzvahs Hashem Elokeichem asher nimechi mitzav eschem hayoim, etc. So till now, Moshe Rabbeinu had given this message to Klal Yisrael of exhorting them to remain loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, warning them to have yiras shamayim. And he first speaks to Klal Yisrael about yiras shamayim, and only later does he speak about mitzvahs. That's the point, the observation of the chizkuni. And that is really the pattern, that there's always the introduction is the importance, the foundation is yiras shamayim, and the mitzvahs are built upon that. Matan Torah, we're given all the mitzvahs, that was preceded by the awe-infusing spectacle of thunder and lightning, and many other examples of that. Yiras shamayim is the underpinning of everything. If there's no yiras shamayim, then it's going to be very challenging to keep the mitzvahs. And that's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing. He sets the importance of yiras shamayim, and then he starts talking about mitzvahs. Because if it's not on that firm foundation, then the edifice will fall. So I want to share with you just a few insights about yiras shamayim. Just a few stories and some anecdotes. The first is something I saw in the book which I have at home called The Ethical Imperative, a collection of essays of different rabbonim, different people, and one is by Rabbi Yisrael Reisman. And let me read you what he writes about himself. Listen to this. When we hear of a shameful incident in our own ranks, we must deal with it as a symptom, not as a disease. Our primary concern should be with developing a stronger sense of the presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam in our lives. If we were to succeed in this, we would subsequently find him, with a capital H, accompany us when we step outside as well. The point can be made clear with a mashal drawn from my own experience, says Rabbi Reisman. As an American boy, I enjoy getting behind the wheel of a car. Once there, my aggressive, hurried style often gets the better of me and puts me in a position where my actions may, God forbid, cause unpleasant things to be said about Orthodox Jews. I don't condone this, and I accept criticism of my behavior, which my wife is often kind enough to provide. Continues Rabbi Reisman, in my Beis HaMedrash days, I had the zuchus of attending Rav Moshe Feinstein's Friday's Shiurim at Mesivta Tiferes Yerushalayim for almost 2 years. Very often, my chaverim and I had the opportunity to drive Rav Moshe from the yeshiva to his home on FDR Drive. I can assure you that when Rav Moshe was in the car, my wife would have loved my driving. There was no danger of Chilul Hashem. Why? Because Rav Moshe was looking. Ask yourselves, how would you drive if Rav Moshe was looking? How would you talk to others if Rav Moshe were listening? How would you conduct your business affairs if Rav Moshe were in the office? We must learn to take this a step further and ask ourselves, how do we drive when the Ribbono Shel Olam is looking? How do we talk when he is listening? How do we conduct ourselves in our business dealings with him, capital H, in the office? Very interesting insight of Rabbi Reisman. Another insight related to this is an amazing story that happens with, I heard this from Rabbi David Kaplan. Rabbi David Kaplan tells a story of a bank robbery that took place in Montreal some years ago. One weekend, the bank was burgled and the contents of many safe deposit boxes were stolen. The victims of the crimes were informed, and many people submitted claims of their loss to the bank. Although not responsible by law, the directors of the bank wanted to compensate their customers, but for some reason they did not have records of the content of the safe deposit boxes, and therefore they had no way of determining if the claims that were made were honest or exaggerated. So the directors of the bank came up with the following idea. There were 7 deposit boxes that had not been broken into. The directors randomly selected one of these 7 and wrote to them to say that their safe deposit box had been burgled and that they should file a claim listing all the items in the safe deposit box so that compensation could be organized. The directors would check to see how honest that person was and would use this as a test, projecting this as a norm for other customers who did really suffer a loss. The person they called was a Jewish lady, Mrs. Bluestein, who happened to be a frum Jew. Mrs. Bluestein named the things taken without listing even one extraneous item. Concluding that people were basically honest, they awarded their loss-suffering customers the full amount of their claims. The story featured prominently in the city's major newspaper, creating an enormous Kiddush Hashem. That's underpinning. That's just an example of Yiras Shamayim. That I'm not going to exaggerate my insurance claim because I have Yiras Shamayim. I live with an awareness and the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Third example, another example, amazing example. And this also I heard from Rabbi David Kaplan. Listen to this. In a city in Israel, a group of people decided to expose certain electricians who were dishonestly inflating their prices at the expense of unsuspecting customers. They secretly wired a home with hidden cameras and instructed the woman of the house to plug a sabotaged appliance into an electrical outlet, thereby short-circuiting the entire electrical system of the house. Then she called several electricians to fix the so-called problem. The first 2 electricians did not even bother inspecting the house, instead announcing that the entire system would have to be rewired to the tune of several thousands of shkolim. But the third electrician, a religious Jew, carefully inspected the house, discovered the appliance that was the source of the problem, and quickly repaired it. He charged a mere 120 shekel for his services. In front of all 3 electricians, the instigators of the scheme emerged from their hiding place and confronted the fraud of the first 2 electricians, demanding an explanation for their outrageous quotes. The electricians tried to deny that they had quoted such prices, but to no avail. They had been caught on camera. Then the men turned to the frum electrician and asked him why he had not inflated his price as his colleagues had done, and thunderstruck, the electrician replied simply, "Hashem is watching me, and he will know if I lie. And besides, my parnos is decreed on Rosh Hashanah, and I cannot change it by being dishonest." Remarkable. That's an example of Yiras Shamayim. That a person who lives with an awareness of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he just conducts himself differently. And that's really what the Chizkuni is saying. That Moshe Rabbeinu, in his parting message to Klal Yisrael, spends 3 parshas, Devarim, Voischan, and Ekev, warning Klal Yisrael to have Yiras Shamayim, to remain loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in their lives. And then he speaks to Klal Yisrael about mitzvahs, which is the opening pasuk of this week's Sedra. Okay, that's the first idea. The second idea is also rooted in the first pasuk, the first word. The Parsha begins, Re'ei onochi nosen lifneichem. Now that's interesting. Why use the expression of Re'ei rather than the usual expression of Shmiya, of hearing? Shema Yisrael. Why Re'ei? So the Baal HaTurim makes various comments on this pasuk, and one of them is, he refers to, by quoting a Medrash Tanchuma, Re'ei onochi pirush mimeni tiru v'chein ta'asu. Watch me, v'chein ta'asu, and then you do the same. Now, this is based on a pasuk in Shoftim. Take a look at the pasuk in the second box of paragraph 2. Gideon, the pasuk says, Vayachetz shleishis me'esoish, that in one of the battles he selected 300 men and he split them into groups. Shleisha roshim vayitein shofars biyad kulam v'kadim reikim elapidim b'soicha kadim, and he armed them in the way described. Vayom aleihem mimeni siru v'chein ta'asu. Watch me do it, and this is how you should act. In other words, I will lead and follow me. When I do this, when I make the noise and break the jugs and etc., then you follow me and watch me and do exactly as I do. And that is really the lesson, in a very powerful lesson in leadership. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling Klal Yisrael, Re'ei onochi, see, watch me, says the Baal HaTurim, Mimeni siru v'chein ta'asu. Watch how I conduct myself and do and follow suit. Moshe Rabbeinu knew the difference between a boss and a leader. A boss says go, and a leader says let's go. Gideon is the exemplar of that. He is the one who says, I am going into battle with you, and I will begin and I will show you how to conduct it and how to behave, and then follow me. Like I do, then you will follow. And that's the catchphrase. Mimeni siru v'chein ta'asu. Let me read to you a very interesting thing. The Moshe Rabbeinu is not only speaking to all of Klal Yisrael, but he's also offering guidance to his successor Yoshua and all future leaders of the Jewish people. And the Baal HaTurim is really highlighting this point, drawing on the words of Gideon from the beginning of Shoftim, that he's leading this small armed force of volunteers. He doesn't have time to train them, and he simply tells them that I'm going to give you a shofar, an earthenware jug with a burning torch inside, and then mimeni siru v'chein ta'asu, and then just watch me and you do this. In other words, when I blow the shofar and break the jug, you will do the same. And the noise and the brightness in the middle of the night, that will create the necessary shock to defeat the enemy and will lead to victory. And that is a very powerful lesson in leadership. Mimeni siru v'chein ta'asu, watch me and you do this. Lead from the front. Don't just issue commands, but lead by example. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. There's a book by a fellow, a non-Jewish author called Paul Dix, and he's written a book on education, which is called When the Adults Change, Everything Changes. And he discusses behavioral management in schools. And he offers a very interesting and effective strategies to improve schools and behavior, even with the most unruliest of students. And his training programs are used by tens of thousands of teachers worldwide. Now, in his book, he tells the following fascinating anecdote, and I'll read it to you. One day, he was touring a school in the north of England when he noticed a 6-year-old walking in the corridor in a distinctive style. The boy was walking very tall, head up and chin up, chest out, with a purposeful stride, hands clasped behind his back. Probably just an eccentric 6-year-old playing a game. But then Mr. Dix saw a class of 9-year-olds snaking through the school on their way to their PE lesson. Every child had the same posture, hands behind their back, chest out, walking tall and proud. He asked the head teacher what this was about and was told that there had been a lot of pushing and shoving and boisterous behavior, particularly in the corridors. Smaller children were getting hurt, and the head teacher wanted to change things. She therefore taught everyone something she called fantastic walking, where members of staff modelled this walk and students soon caught on. The adult model was constant and consistent, and things changed for the better. Now, of course, she could have chosen to apply the same principle of consistency to a more aggressive and punitive system. She could have given lunchtime detentions for children who were seen running or pushing in the corridor. She could have plastered the corridors with no running posters. Or even dug a cellar in the basement to house the offenders. But after weeks of punishment and explosive confrontations and broken trust, the children may behave well in the corridors when the adults happen to be watching. This enlightened head teacher may have intuited this lesson taught by Moshe Rabbeinu and Gideon many centuries later. It's interesting, just by the way, in the IDF, the words of Mimenu Tiru V'chein Ta'asu, watch me and you do this, are written over the entrance of what's called the Bet Sefer LeKatzinim, which is the training school for officers. In other words, the subliminal message is that to be a leader, you have to lead by example. That's really what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, says the Baal HaTurim. Okay, one final idea on this week's Sedra, Parsha Re'eh, and also from the same pasuk, the first pasuk. I haven't gone beyond the first pasuk in this week's Shiur. Re'eh anechi nosen lefnechem hayom bracha uklala, es habracha shetishmeu el mitzvot Hashem elokechem asher anechi metzaveh eschem hayom. The word hayom features twice in the first pasuk. Moshe Rabbeinu is emphasizing the power and importance of the word hayom. Let me read to you an extract, a lot of reading in this week's Shiur, but let me read to you an amazing extract from a wonderful sefer called The Person in the Parsha by someone called Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb. He's a well-known American Rav, and I want to share with you something he wrote on Parsha Surah. It's just fabulous. So let me read to you, because he writes so beautifully. Let me read to you what he writes. Rabbi Dov Cohen was born in Seattle into a family of Lithuanian Jewish immigrants. The family faced the challenges of American assimilation in the early decades of the 20th century. Rabbi Cohen's mother witnessed the tragic process of assimilation with which her older children were involved. She was determined that her youngest child, Dov, would receive a Jewish education as intensive as the one that she had witnessed back in the old country. So, in 1926, she took her then 14-year-old son from Seattle eastward across the United States, across the Atlantic Ocean, through the Straits of Gibraltar, and ultimately to the then totally primitive and isolated village of Hebron in British-controlled Palestine. She committed him to the tutelage of the famous Alter of Slobodka, Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel. Rav Dov Cohen's life was long and full. He was one of the last Talmidim of the Hebron Yeshiva who survived the horrible massacres in the summer of 1929. Rabbi Cohen visited Seattle several times during the 80 years that followed his move to Eretz Yisrael in 1926. Each time he experienced a culture shock. In his biography, written in Hebrew entitled Vayelchu Shnehem Yachtov, and the two of them walked together, he recounts an anecdote of one such culture shock. Once, on a Sunday morning, Rabbi Cohen found himself in a taxi with the radio on. He soon realized that the radio was playing a sermon being delivered by a Protestant minister in his church. He was unable to have the taxi driver turn the radio off or change the station, and so, quite uncomfortably, he listened to the preacher's sermon. And this is what he heard. The group in charge of increasing enrollment in Gehenna in hell was discussing ways to get more people to sin. One suggested encouraging them to steal, but the others all protested that the laws against theft were too strict and not enough people would sin by stealing. Another suggested encouraging people to lie. Again, others protested that lying would make people feel too guilty. It wouldn't work. Finally came the suggestion with which everyone agreed. Let's encourage people to do good deeds, acts of loving kindness, acts of charity, acts of courage and justice, but let's tell them not to do these things today, but rather tomorrow. Rabbi Cohen was moved to the core by that story and was inspired by it. Indeed, he shared it with Jewish audiences wherever he could. The lesson he learned and shared was one that Judaism also teaches, albeit not with that particular story. It is the lesson of procrastination, of the importance of doing things as soon as possible and not putting them off tomorrow. And that really is the lesson in the opening pasuk in this week's Sedra. Re'ei anochi nosei nifnechem hayoim. The stress is on the word hayom, today, this day and this moment. Do the right thing today and it will be a blessing. Put it off until tomorrow and the result is cursed. We have all heard the advice, never put off until tomorrow what you can do today. This advice is useful in all aspects of life, but it is especially useful in the context of religious behavior and ruchnius. Postponing until a tomorrow which may never come, can be, as the Gentile preacher's story suggests, nothing less than sinful. Rabbi Weinreb concludes that we may have also heard the adage, procrastination is the thief of time. The opening words of the Parsha suggest that procrastination is not only the thief of time, but it is the thief of life and of blessing too. Re'ei, see, I have given you today, this day, now, not later, to perform the good deed, and if you do it now, it will be a blessing. If you procrastinate, you may never do it at all, and it may result in quite a different thing from a blessing. And while the impetus for the lesson that Rabbi Cohen taught all his life was from a Protestant preacher on a Sunday morning long ago, this is the lesson of the opening pasuk of Parshas Re'ei. Remarkable, amazing. So there we have it, 3 fabulous ideas from Parshas Re'ei. The first is the Chizkuni. The Chizkuni tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu warns in his parting message to Klal Yisrael to remain loyal to Hashem, exhorting them to keep loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and warning them about having Yiras Shamayim. And then only later, beginning from Parshas Re'ei, he instructs them about the mitzvahs. Asher anochi metzaveh eschem hayom. And the story of Ramosha with Rabbi Reisman, the safe deposits in Montreal, and the electrician in Eretz Yisrael. Then we saw the word re'eh. Why re'eh and not shmir? So says the Balatzurim, based on a pasuk in Shoftim with Gideon, re'eh mimenu tiru v'chein ta'asu. Mimeni siru v'chein ta'asu. Watch me and do, which is really the lesson in leadership that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling his Talmid Yeshua and really all future Jewish leaders the importance of role modeling and being an exemplar, and that was the case of Paul Dixon, fantastic walking. And lastly, the focus on Hayyim, that beautiful idea of Rav Hirsch Weinreb with the anecdote of Rav Dov Cohen. 3 very interesting ideas from this week's Zedra. Thank you.